Now, even though I wouldn't say I actively want either Mainoo or Garnacho sold in the summer, depending on the budget available and who we could replace them with, you'd have to at least consider it, as they would command huge fees which would go down as pure profit as well. Osimhen's release clause is reportedly around £58 million, which is around the figures they were talking about United being willing to accept for Garnacho in January, and considering Napoli would be getting a direct swap for Osimhen, who only has 1 year left on his contract anyway and is on around £10 million a season currently, I think it could be a deal that United could do, as comparing the two players, even if Osimhen is on 4 times Garnacho's current salary of £2.5 million a season, overall I think you'd have to say it would be a massive upgrade to United's attack. If Garnacho is worth around 60 million, then Mainoo is probably worth at least 70 to 75 million pounds, probably over 80 million pounds if he goes to a Premier League rival. Now, if we were to sell Mainoo, I don't think it would be wise to do a direct swap, and I'm going to explain why in just a minute, but before that, if you want to check out any cheap, good quality football jerseys, go over to dragonjersey.com. They've got a variety of different current season and retro jerseys, and we'll have the new season jerseys when they do come out in the summer. You can also use code Atlantis at checkout for a 10% discount, and depending on where you live, you can get 7 to 12 day delivery time, as well as a 30-day money back guarantee. But if you do want to get in contact to check any information before you buy, they do have their WhatsApp and email on the site, so I'll leave it linked in the description and comment section below, and remember to use code Atlantis at checkout for a 10% discount for a limited time. So I think if you are selling Mainoo, you have to bring in 2 players for that money, and if I was going to choose 2 central midfielders, it would be Ederson and Angelo Stiller. Ideally it would be Tijani Reinders and Ederson, but because both Reinders and Ederson are likely to cost around 45 to 50 million pounds, I don't know if you'd be able to sign both, but considering Eriksen would be leaving on a free, Casemiro hopefully moves to Saudi Arabia and we get some sort of transfer fee for him, and Toby Collier could also be sold for maybe between 10 to 12 million pounds as well, which would go down as pure profit. It isn't massively unrealistic, especially if you are getting 70 to 80 million pounds for Mainoo. So Ederson would be my main target. I flirted with the idea of Ogachukwu, but if we are replacing Mainoo, I think we would need a robust tackler with added athleticism and physicality, who could also replace the ball progressing and creative threat that would be lost with Mainoo. And so that's why I think Ederson would be worth paying the extra 15 to 18 million pounds, compared with targeting the slightly younger Ogachukwu. And the reason I think Ederson and Angelo Stiller for what I imagine would be around 80 to 85 million pounds combined, given that according to reports Angelo Stiller does apparently have a 33.5 million pound release clause in the contract he signed with Stuttgart earlier on this year, would as a pairing be an upgrade on Mainoo and Collier if we were to sell for around that price as well, is because I think Ederson and Stiller both excel in what I would define as key attributes, not just for Amorim's system but for modern football in general, and those attributes are incisive passing through the centre of the pitch along with press resistance with their back to goal, which Stiller would provide in abundance, and pace and power, either when covering ground to move across and break up an attack, or driving the ball through the centre of the pitch powerfully during a transition. Now don't get me wrong, Mainoo, like Ugarte, isn't exactly slow, and I wouldn't even say that neither are quick enough to play in an Amorim midfield, but I think if Amorim wants to persist with a midfield double pivot, in the 3-4-3, particularly when pressing aggressively out of possession, I think he needs to raise the physical and athletic ceiling and bring in someone like Ederson, who I would define as a ground covering specialist, which I think would massively improve United's high press, counter press and rest defence. Ederson's extra pace in central midfield I think raises the athletic and physical ceiling significantly, and this is important because the issue I see with the 3-4-3 out of possession as opposed to a 3-5-2 is that with the extra man in the front line, the midfield double pivot needs to cover a lot more ground and a lot quicker as well. And if you look back at examples of back 3 or back 5 systems that have been highly successful, the stylistics of the players in central midfield is always crucial. Take Antonio Conte's 2016-2017 Chelsea side which won the Premier League. Conte used not one but 2 incredibly athletic and physical ball winners in Kante and Matic in his double pivot, who could cover large spaces quickly, whilst also having the ability to transition the attack at speed via their ball carrying through the centre of the pitch. Ugarte and Mainoo individually aren't an issue, but as a pair, I just think they lack the power of a Kante and a Matic. Now you may point back to Sporting's central midfield and say that neither Heumann or Morita, the double pivot that Amorim used most recently at Sporting during the game against City, fall into the category of a Kante or a Matic stylistically, and I would agree, but I'd also point out that the Premier League requires much greater physicality and athleticism throughout the whole squad, compared with the Portuguese Primeira Liga, but particularly in central midfield. And so this is why, unless Amorim's going to take influence from Inzaghi and shift to more of a three-man central midfield in order to protect the individual players in the centre of midfield, as Inzaghi does with Mkhitaryan, Barella and Çalhanoğlu, neither of whom I would describe as physical or athletic athletes. Maybe you could put Barella into that category, but you certainly wouldn't categorise him as a Kante, Matic or Ederson. Then I think United need to sign at least one central midfielder in the summer who can provide what Ederson would. And I mean, just compare this setup. You sell Garnacho, Collier and Mainoo for around £140 million at least, maybe up to £160 to £165 million with add-ons. You get Eriksen and Lindelof's salaries off of the books, along with Casemiro, or at least half of his salary in a bad case scenario if he doesn't go to Saudi Arabia, and use the money to go and sign Osimhen for his £58 million release clause, give him around £10 million, which is what he's currently on at Napoli, and then replace Mainoo and Collier with Ederson and Stiller. And then you could use any money that you get for Højlund or Antony and bring in a more consistent Garnacho replacement. And so this would leave you with a midfield double pivot of Ederson and either Ugarte or Stiller depending on the game, with Bruno Fernandes and maybe one of Xerxes Ahmad, or preferably a new signing even if it is someone on loan like Nkunku just for next season, playing either side of Osimhen. Now if you compare the 3 players we've sold and the 3 players we've brought in, forget about maybe selling Højlund and Antony and bringing in someone like Nkunku for the moment, you've just about broken even in terms of money coming in and money going out. Now obviously if Ineos aren't going to improve our pace, power, ball carrying, progressive passing, aerial and finishing capabilities, then it's not going to be a great idea to sell Garnacho or Mainoo. But those 3 signings that I just mentioned for Garnacho, Mainoo and Collier as well, I'm struggling to say I wouldn't take that. Now let me know in the comments if you think it would be an upgrade. Personally I think it would, but there's also another reason why, even though I wouldn't be actively trying to sell Mainoo, at a certain price you do have to at least consider it, and it's something I haven't really heard people talk about. But before I tell you what that is, a quick reminder, I do have a Patreon. I've just put out some recent articles this week, going into some of the detail over the Louis Vuitton Red Bull Paris FC takeover, so if you are interested in that as well as some other niche topics, you can get a 7-day free trial. You can also sign up for my in-game Instagram group chat, so I'll leave my Patreon linked in all the usual places, the eye above, description, comment section, and on the end screen after the video. So the reason I think United have to at least consider selling Mainoo for the right price is because of injuries. I don't know about you, but I've just got a gut feeling that the injuries with Mainoo are going to persist season after season. I don't think he's going to be as injury prone as the likes of Mount or Shaw, but what is starting to worry me is not just the frequency of his injuries, but also the length of time he's out. It seems to be 2 to 3 months more often than 2 to 3 weeks, and I think that's an issue for United, because if Mainoo is missing 25 to 30% of the season with injuries, then you've also got to factor in the recovery time for him to get back up to speed after returning, and then having to rest him as well, not to mention Amorim not even starting him for tactical reasons, as he's done this season even when Mainoo has been fit, preferring to drop Bruno Fernandes into the double pivot rather than using Mainoo alongside Ugarte. Also, from Ruben Amorim's point of view, I'm not even sure that Mainoo's a perfect fit for any position in the 3-4-3. I'm not 100% convinced with him long term at either central midfield in the double pivot or in one of the 2 interior forward positions. I think ideally in one of those 2 interior forward positions you require more pace and ideally greater goal scoring output in the final third as well. You need forwards or at least wingers kind of in the mould of a Garnacho rather than a central midfielder like Mainoo. But even in a double pivot, I think you'd have to put him alongside someone like Ederson, who has greater pace and ball carrying ability compared to Ugarte. I just think Mainoo and Ugarte, as a double pivot pairing, doesn't have the pace or the ball carrying ability that ideally I'd want, and that's why I would be looking for someone like Ederson if I was to be replacing Mainoo. I do think Mainoo suits more of a 3-5-2, where he's able to play in a central midfield 3, where he can drop deep to get on the ball, but also float between the lines when the opportunity is there. The issue is, I think Bruno Fernandes in this role is currently a lot better and a lot more dependable, even if it is just getting on the pitch compared to Mainoo. If I had to give Mainoo a role in Amorim's system, it would be to play alongside Fernandes and Ugarte in a midfield 3. But with me feeling that United should be looking to improve the pace and power in their central midfield, it might actually be Mainoo who you look to improve on, just because of his availability, especially with Mount being another high earner in central midfield who's constantly injured. Now I think Garnacho is a better fit for one of those 2 interior forward roles and potentially could also play as a wing back on either side if he was trained in that role, which Amorim doesn't seem to want to do, but it is something I will look into, as this would give him the sort of versatility which could be incredibly valuable throughout a whole season. And so if you are selling Garnacho, I think it's got to be for around £60 million if not more. His energy alone and ability to at least make something happen would would have to be replaced in the squad. But overall, if you compare Garnacho's effect on the side to Osimhen's, even if Garnacho was to improve significantly over the next 2 to 3 years, it's still a risk to assume that he'd even get to Osimhen's level of impact. And so for me, if Osimhen is possible, that is a kind of game-changing signing that could be the catalyst for Amorim's success at United. And so overall, Garnacho being sold is probably more likely, though I think we should at least consider our options with Mainoo, because if we did get the replacements right, and that is a big if, we could come out with 2 players who could offer us more as a pair than Mainoo and Ugarte, and I would say that is the case with Stiller and Ederson, and that's not even factoring in potential injury concerns that have to be raised with Mainoo at this point. So let me know what your thoughts are on Mainoo and Garnacho. What prices would you consider selling them for? And if you do want to check out any cheap, good quality football jerseys, go over to Dragon Jersey. I'll leave it linked in the comment section and description, and use code Atlantis at checkout for a 10% discount for a limited time. And if you do want to sign up to my Patreon to get access to my articles or the in-game Instagram group chat, I'll leave that linked on the end screen now alongside another video.